The morning at the Coastal Navy training base began like most others. Icy winds blew across the field, carrying a salty smell from the ocean. Young recruits, their uniforms stiff and boots dusty, stood in rigid rows. Their faces were tense with anticipation. Today was their first full-scale drill under their new commander, Lieutenant Mark Hayes. Stories of his intensity had crossed the base like wildfire. He was strict, disciplined, and unforgiving. Some said he had never smiled in uniform. Others swore he slept with his boots on. All the young men believed one thing. Nothing escaped his sharp eyes. Hayes walked with military precision, every step sounding like a hammer striking steel. His presence made the air heavier. He said little, but his stare alone could silence a crowd. The recruits straightened as soon as he stepped into view. Even experienced officers seemed to breathe more carefully around him. They had barely begun morning drills when an unexpected sight stole everyone's attention. Near the gate, an old man slowly approached, leaning on a wooden cane. His pace was steady but weak, as if battling an invisible weight. His clothes were simple, an old, fading military jacket with medals pinned unevenly. Some were dusty, others shone with surprising brightness. A few recruits whispered to one another, unsure whether he was lost or simply confused. No one had seen him enter. One moment the path was empty, and the next he appeared like a wandering ghost from another time. He walked straight toward the training yard. The guards hesitated. He looked too harmless to stop. His eyes, though aged, were sharp. He scanned the field with familiarity, as if every corner held a memory. Commander Hayes noticed him immediately. At first he assumed the old man must be somebody's grandfather, visiting the wrong part of the base. But when the stranger walked right into formation, standing among the recruits, the irritation on Hayes's face hardened. He strode across the yard, boots pounding on concrete, and stopped directly in front of him. "What do you think you're doing here?" Hayes demanded sharply. The old man looked up with a soft, calm expression. His skin was wrinkled, his hands trembled slightly on the cane. But there was dignity in his posture, something noble that did not bow to time. "I'm here to observe," the old man answered quietly, as if speaking to a friend rather than a furious officer. Some recruits exchanged surprised glances. Nobody observed his SEAL training, not without invitation. "To observe," Hayes repeated, almost laughing. "This is a restricted base. You don't simply walk in here and observe. At least tell us your rank so I know if you belong anywhere near this yard." The old man smiled faintly. There was something mysterious in the way he carried himself. Neither afraid nor prideful. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he said. A few of the younger recruits smirked. Hayes, however, narrowed his eyes, annoyed by what felt like a challenge. "Oh, try me," Hayes replied coldly. "What rank were you?" The old man straightened slightly, his voice slow but firm. "I was once a commanding officer." The whisper traveled quickly down the rows of recruits. Some lifted their eyebrows. Others stared more closely at the medals on his jacket. There were many, more than most officers alive wore. Yet Hayes still looked unconvinced. "Right," Hayes said sarcastically. "And I'm the President of the United States." A few nervous laughs escaped among the recruits, but they died quickly when the old man didn't react. Hayes continued, growing more irritated. "How about you leave before you embarrass yourself? This is not a museum. We don't need washed-up stories from someone who wandered in from the street." Still, the old veteran did not get angry. He simply rubbed his thumb over a medal and spoke softly, almost as though speaking to himself. "Your father wanted you to lead." Hayes flinched. His father had indeed dreamed of seeing him in uniform, but had never lived to witness it. "And don't speak as if you knew him," Hayes snapped. The veteran raised his eyebrows at the outburst. "Well, I knew him better than most," he said quietly. "It may be better than you." That single sentence hit Hayes like a silent blow. His lips tightened. "No one dared move." "You trained with him," Hayes muttered. "Fine, but people tell stories all the time. What proof do you have?" The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted one hand and touched the highest medal pinned over his heart. It was a Navy Cross, the same award Hayes' father had earned decades ago. "This," he said, tapping the medal. "Well, your father earned his on the same day I earned mine." Hayes stared at the medal. His father's identical medal was locked inside a wooden box at home. "How could this stranger know?" The veteran continued. "Our father was fresh out of officer school. Brave, stubborn, honest. Reminded me of a storm, Always moving, always crashing against something. He wanted to save everyone. The recruits leaned closer, captivated. They'd never heard their commander spoken about in such a personal way, and certainly not his father. The old man's voice grew distant, as if replaying memories buried beneath decades of silence. We were deep behind enemy lines. The mission went wrong. We took heavy fire. Men were falling. I was pinned beneath wreckage, losing blood fast. He paused. Hayes held his breath. Your father, the veteran continued slowly, and disobeyed orders to come back for me. Gasps fluttered through the yard. He carried me through gunfire, dragged me across broken ground. He saved my life, even though he nearly lost his. Hayes felt his chest tighten. He had heard whispers of such a mission, a classified story his father never fully shared. The veteran's gaze softened. Your father didn't care about ranks or medals. He cared about people. Hayes stood frozen. His father had always told him that leadership meant sacrifice, but hearing it from a man who lived through it made the words real. But discipline had been drilled into Hayes like bone. He clung to it now like a shield. Why did he never mention you? Hayes asked quietly. The old man lowered his eyes. Some memories hurt too much. Some stories belong to the heart. Hayes swallowed. He suddenly felt very small. So that's why you came here? Hayes muttered. To tell stories? I came, the veteran corrected gently, to see the man your father hoped you'd become. The recruits turned toward Hayes. His rigid posture faltered. For the first time, they saw him not as a commander, but as a son trying desperately to understand a father he barely knew. Hayes's voice cracked. You could have sent a letter. No, the veteran whispered. Some journeys must be made in person. He leaned slightly more on his cane. The years weighed heavily on him, but his eyes, steady, unbroken, held the strength of someone who had never stopped serving. Hayes said nothing. The courtyard was quiet enough to hear the wind rustle the flag above them. The old man finally exhaled. What your father taught me, I'm here to teach you. Hayes looked up sharply. Teach me? The veteran nodded. A leadership without humility is hollow. Strength without kindness is dangerous. You are his son, yes, but you must choose what kind of man you will be. The words struck deeper than any discipline Hayes had ever known. For the first time, the commander looked less like a man in charge and more like someone standing at the doorway of a truth he wasn't ready for. He stared at the veteran, this stranger who carried pieces of his father no one else possessed, and felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest. Not anger, not authority, not fear, something he hadn't felt in years, a quiet longing for the man whose shadow he'd been chasing his whole life. And now, standing before him was someone holding that story. Everything about the courtyard felt different now. A few minutes earlier, it had been a place of commands and drills, a rigid world where emotions were locked away. But now it felt like a room with open windows, letting memories drift in from decades past. The recruits sensed it too. The man they feared most, Lieutenant Mark Hayes, stood not as a commander giving orders, but as a son standing in front of his father's past. You saved my father, Hayes asked, barely above a whisper. The old veteran shook his head gently. No, he said. Your father saved me, Hayes blinked. But you said you commanded him. I did, the veteran replied. But command doesn't make a man greater. A true leader is defined by his heart, not his rank. The words landed like anchors inside Hayes's chest. He had built his entire career on discipline, rules, and strength, never once considering that his father might have measured leadership differently. The veteran's eyes flickered with memory. He was still young when he joined my unit. Most men arrive trying to prove themselves. Your father came trying to protect everyone else. He smiled slightly, even those above him. Hayes felt heat behind his eyes. His father had never spoken proudly of his own heroism, only about the responsibility of wearing the uniform. Growing up, Hayes had tried to emulate him, but the more he tried, the more distant that image seemed. The veteran took a slow breath. You remind me of him, he said. Hayes almost smiled, until the man continued, but not the part that mattered most. The words struck like a sudden blow. Hayes stiffened. Defensive instinct rising, but the veteran raised a hand. That is not a criticism, he said gently. It is an invitation. Hayes didn't understand. The veteran explained, your father believed that command was not about control, but about care. He taught me that a commander serves his men, not the other way around. He touched one of his medals. He said every medal he earned belonged to someone who helped him earn it. That's Hayes looked down at his own pristine uniform, every line perfect, every thread precise, but suddenly it felt heavy, cold, as if it lacked something invisible, something important. He opened his mouth to speak, but the veteran went on. "You wonder why he never spoke of me," he said. Hayes nodded. Because some things burn too deeply into the heart to be spoken without pain," the old man answered. I never forgot the men he lost that day. He never forgot what he carried out of that battlefield. His gaze lifted and settled on Hayes. "And some things," he continued, "must be handed to the next generation, not through stories, but through people." One of the recruits suddenly shifted his weight. The only sound besides a distant bird call. Everyone was listening, held by threads of memory. "Tell me what happened," Hayes finally said. The veteran nodded slowly. "We were deployed into an operation meant to be simple. Intelligence said the enemy was scattered, nothing more than a cleanup. But the information was wrong. There were no scattered remnants. There was a fortress waiting." His voice tightened. "We were trapped. The recruits leaned in, even the wind seemed to quiet. We lost half our men in the first 30 minutes. When I took a hit and went down, your father was ordered to retreat with the survivors, but he didn't." The veteran's hand trembled slightly. "He came back for me. Through bullets, smoke, and a firestorm of chaos." Hayes's throat tightened. He had imagined his father's bravery many times, but never with such vividness. "But your father didn't stop there," the veteran continued. "When he pulled me out, he went back again for another man, and another, each time carrying more weight and bleeding more." The old man closed his eyes. "He dragged 4 men out that day. An act of madness, some would say. But to him, those men were his family." Hayes felt tears press against his eyes. "And when we were finally safe," the veteran whispered, "he stood over us, wounded everywhere, but smiling, as if he would do it all again without hesitation." For a long moment there was only silence. The recruits stared at the old man wide-eyed. They had all imagined heroism before, but this felt different. Raw, costly, real. Hayes spoke weakly. "My father never told me any of this." The veteran nodded. "He wouldn't. Heroes seldom tell their own stories. They leave them for others to carry, and then for others to carry." Hayes struggled to steady his breathing. He suddenly remembered how his father would sit quietly in the backyard at dusk, staring at nothing, his face unreadable. As a child, Hayes never understood. Now he did. "A mission changed him," the old man said. "He learned that strength without compassion is danger, and compassion without strength is helplessness." He looked at Hayes again. This time, not with nostalgia, but urgency. Both must exist together. The commander swallowed hard. "What happened after the war?" he asked. The veteran's smile faded. "Haas to build a quiet life. A peaceful one. He wanted that for you more than anything." He paused. "But wounds don't always bleed on the outside." The recruits lowered their eyes. Even those who had never seen battle understood this truth. Hayes took a small step closer to the old man. For the first time since the encounter began, he looked vulnerable. "You said," Hayes whispered, "that he taught you lessons, that you came here to teach me." The veteran nodded. "He wanted you strong, but not hardened. Brave, but not blind. He wanted you to lead with honor, but also with love." He placed a hand over his heart. "He told me once, a real commander does not stand above his men, he stands among them." Hayes's jaw tightened again, but this time not with pride or defiance, with humility. The veteran leaned closer, voice soft. "Your father lived and died, believing you would become the leader he could not be long enough to show you." Hayes felt tears break loose, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, silently, onto the ground where his father once trained. The courtyard, once a place of sharp orders and cold silence, had become a sanctuary of memory and transformation. The old man stood straight despite his years. Hayes stood before him, no longer the unshakable commander, but a man finally opening a door his heart had locked for too long. A quiet settled over the training yard, heavier than before. The recruits barely moved. The breeze carried only the faint rattle of the flag high above, its fabric snapping like distant echoes of battles past. Lieutenant Mark Hayes stood in front of the old man, no longer with squared shoulders and a rigid jaw, but with the softness of someone facing the parts of himself he'd hidden away. The veteran reached slowly into his coat pocket. His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. When he pulled his hand back out, he held a small, weathered box. The edges were cracked. The lid looked like it had opened and closed 1,000 times. It was the kind of box that never held something ordinary. Hayes stared at it, unsure whether he wanted to see what was inside. "This," the old man said softly, "belonged to your father." The words alone made Hayes's heart twist. The veteran offered the box forward. Hayes hesitated a moment before reaching out. His fingers brushed the rough wood, surprised by how warm it felt, almost alive, as if it carried the heartbeat of the man who once held it. With slow care, he lifted the lid. Inside lay a simple metal compass. Its silver finish had dulled with time, but it still shone in places where fingers had touched it again and again. The glass was scratched, the needle slightly bent. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't expensive, yet Hayes felt as though he were holding treasure.